For almost the entire war, German tank crews fought with a quiet, confident arrogance, an arrogance earned through steel and fire. The Tiger I, with its massive 88mm gun and thick hide of armor, had shrugged off American shells from North Africa to Normandy. The Panther, sleek and deadly, was the perfect predator at medium range. Even the humble Panzer IV felt invincible from the front when facing Shermans or M10s. By late 1944, this belief, this certainty had become doctrine. Americans could not kill German heavy armor head-on. Shells bounced, guns cracked, tanks burned. That was how the battlefield had always worked. But then, in the cold autumn rain of Lorraine, during a morning thick with fog and the smell of wet earth, something happened that German tank crews had never experienced before. A Panther, advancing confidently along a ridge, spotted an American vehicle at long range, a silhouette that looked familiar. Low hull, angled turret, the outline of a tank destroyer. The German gunner smirked, an easy kill. He began traversing the turret, preparing the shot. But before he could settle the reticle, a flash erupted from the American position. A second later, the Panther shuddered violently as a shell smashed through its frontal armor that had deflected nearly every American round for 2 years. Flames licked out of the turret hatches. The German crew never even fired. The survivors who crawled from the burning wreck told their officers a story no one wanted to believe. "We were hit from the front, from over a kilometer. No American gun should do that." They were wrong. A new weapon had arrived. A weapon designed, tested, and deployed for the sole purpose of ending German tank supremacy. Its name was the M36 Jackson, and at its heart was a gun the Germans never expected to face from the ground, the 90mm M3. To understand how shocking this was to the Wehrmacht, one must look back at the American struggle of 1942 to 44. For years, American tank crews had fought at a painful disadvantage. The 75mm guns on Sherman tanks were excellent for infantry support, but almost useless against Panthers and Tigers from the front. Even upgraded 76mm Shermans often needed side shots to kill a German heavy tank. Tank destroyers like the M10 Wolverine helped, but only with careful ambushes and flank shots. American crews had to improvise, to outmaneuver, to get dangerously close. Many times too close. Countless American tankers died knowing their guns could not save them. Countless crews faced the awful truth that even a perfect shot would bounce. And countless German tankers developed a grim, calm confidence, the knowledge that frontal armor was on their side. Then, behind closed doors in Aberdeen and Detroit, the U.S. Army Ordnance Department decided, no more running, no more flanking, no more helplessness. The answer was already in American hands, just not yet on a tank. The 90mm M1 anti-aircraft gun, ancestor of the famous M2AA gun, had been devastating Japanese aircraft since Pearl Harbor. It was powerful, precise, and rugged. Engineers reworked it into a tank-killing form, the 90mm M3. Initially mounted on the prototype M26 Pershing, the M3 was then bolted onto a modified M10 chassis with a new turret, creating the M36 Jackson. It was not elegant. It was not heavily armored. Its turret was still open-topped like the M10. But the gun, that gun, changed everything. The first units received their M36s in the fall of 1944, just as the Allied advance into France slowed under stiffening German resistance. Crews who had survived months of war stared at the long, thick barrel of the 90mm and felt something they had not felt in a long time. Hope. Something powerful, something new, something that could finally stand toe-to-toe with a tiger instead of hiding in a hedgerow. Gunners trained relentlessly, learning the ballistics of HVAP rounds, the recoil behavior of the new weapon, the best distances for frontal penetrations. Doctrine changed overnight. No longer were American tank destroyers told to avoid frontal engagements at all costs. The M36 was made to break those costs. When M36s rolled into Lorraine with the 705th and 773rd Tank Destroyer Battalions, their arrival sent ripples of curiosity through American infantry. Soldiers gathered around them like spectators around a prize fighter. Is that really a 90? Can that thing really kill a tiger head-on? The answer arrived on the battlefield. The fog of Lorraine became the stage for a new chapter in armored warfare. German tank crews advancing along the Mosel River expected Shermans and M10s, easy prey, familiar victims. They did not expect a gun that could punch through 160 millimeters of armor at 1,000 meters. They did not expect a weapon that transformed American tank destroyers from underdogs to predators. Reports flowed into Wehrmacht headquarters in Metz and Saarbrücken. A new American Geschütz, larger than 76 millimeters, penetrated a Panther from the front. Our Tiger platoon lost a vehicle at 1,200 meters, no flank hits, frontal impact. We believe the Americans have introduced a weapon comparable to our 88. The arrogance was gone. The smirks were gone. The myth of invincibility shattered. Panzer commanders who once pushed aggressively across open fields now hesitated. For the first time, they had to ask themselves, is there a Jackson out there? American crews felt it too, a shift in the balance of power. No longer forced to gamble their lives on risky flanking runs, they fought with newfound confidence. They could meet German armor head-on. They could shoot first and survive. They could hold the line. The M36 didn't just bring a weapon, it brought a psychological reversal. A reversal powerful enough that one captured German tanker, trembling with disbelief, muttered, "The Americans finally have a gun that kills us from the front." The war has changed. And he was right. Because in Lorraine, on wet roads, in fog-filled valleys, among burning tanks, the Jackson proved its purpose. The era of German armored invincibility had ended.
For years, German tank crews believed something with absolute certainty. No American gun could pierce the frontal armor of a Tiger or a Panther at real combat ranges. Shermans could not do it. The 76mm gun on improved models could not do it consistently. Even the M10 and its 3-inch gun needed perfect conditions and careful flanking to bring down a heavy German tank. This belief was so deeply rooted in the Wehrmacht that it shaped their tactics, their confidence, and even their morale. But in late 1944, that belief was destroyed almost overnight. And the weapon that destroyed it was the American 90mm M3 gun mounted on the M36 Jackson. The gun did not arrive as a surprise to American engineers. They had known for years that the force lacked a true tank killer. While the 88mm gun made the Tiger a nightmare opponent, the United States had nothing comparable on the ground. The solution had existed all along, hiding in plain sight. It was the American 90mm anti-aircraft gun, a weapon designed to tear through high-altitude bombers with raw velocity and power. If it could shatter the armor of a German aircraft at thousands of feet, it could just as easily shatter the armor of a Tiger at ground level. Engineers reworked it into a tank-mounted form. They strengthened the breech, calibrated the recoil system, and modified the barrel for armor-piercing ammunition. The result was the 90mm M3, and it was brutal. In testing, the gun penetrated more than 160 millimeters of steel at well over 1,000 meters. On a flat target range, it punched through plates that the 76mm gun could barely dent. Armor that had once been considered untouchable was suddenly vulnerable. American officers stared at the test results in disbelief. Finally, they had a weapon that could challenge German heavy armor without relying on luck or ambush tactics. When the first units of M36 Jacksons arrived in Europe, crews gathered around the long barrel of the new gun like pilgrims at a shrine. Many had spent months fighting Panthers they could not kill from the front. They had watched rounds bounce off German armor again and again. Seeing the 90mm gun for the first time felt like seeing a thunderbolt forged from hope itself. And when they pulled the trigger in combat, they realized something even more shocking. The gun was not just powerful, it was precise.
The high velocity of the 90mm round gave it a flat trajectory that made long-range shooting far easier than anything the Americans had used before. At 1,200 meters, the M3 hit with the same deadly authority that the 76mm gun had at half the distance. American gunners learned quickly. They learned to aim for the lower hull of Panthers. They learned to strike the flat front plate of Tiger tanks. They learned to use HVAP ammunition whenever possible, sending rounds that moved so fast they seemed almost invisible. And soon, German tankers noticed too. In Lorraine, a Panther was destroyed from the front before its crew even saw the M36 that fired the shot. In the Moselle Valley, a Tiger was hit through the glasses plate, the round driving deep into the fighting compartment and killing the crew instantly. At first, German officers refused to believe the reports. They insisted it must have been a flank shot. They insisted it must have been a British Firefly. They insisted the American crews were lying. But the truth kept repeating itself on the battlefield. Panthers burning from the front at ranges they once considered safe. Tigers stopped cold by a single direct hit. German officers wrote reports filled with confusion and fear. One of those reports contained a single sentence that spread across the German armored corps like a warning siren. The Americans now possess a weapon equal to our 88. That realization changed everything. The psychological wall that had protected German tank crews for years suddenly cracked. They no longer advanced with the calm confidence that their armor would hold. They no longer assumed they could duel American forces from the front. Now they had to worry about a weapon they could not outrun, could not outshoot, and could not ignore. The arrival of the 90mm gun was not just a technical upgrade. It was a transformation of American armored warfare. At last, the United States had a gun that did not bounce, a gun that did not fail, a gun that could kill a Tiger head-on. And for the first time in the war, the Germans felt what the Americans had felt for years: the cold, sharp fear of knowing the enemy could kill you before you could kill him.
The fog lay thick over the Moselle Valley on the morning the M36 Jackson truly announced its arrival to the German army. It clung to the trees, rolled across wet fields, and swallowed entire ridgelines into a dull gray haze. For German panzer crews, it was the perfect hunting weather. The Panther's long gun thrived in low light, and the Tiger seemed unstoppable when hidden behind fog and distance. For years, American tankers had dreaded days like this. Fog meant they could not flank. Fog meant they could not spot ambushes. Fog meant Panthers and Tigers would strike first. And when German tanks struck first, Sherman crews usually did not survive the second shot. But Lorraine in the fall of 1944 was different. Fog no longer guaranteed German superiority. The battlefield belonged not to the tanks with the thickest armor, but to the tanks with the farthest reach, and the longest reach now belonged to the Americans. The 90mm gun changed the game instantly. German tankers moving through the mist believed they were safe at 1,000 meters. They believed the Americans could not see them, let alone kill them at that distance. But tucked behind hedgerows, church walls, and low riverbanks were M36 Jacksons, vehicles American crews themselves barely believed in until they saw the results with their own eyes. The Jacksons waited silently, engines at idle, their long barrels pointed into the fog like spears aimed at ghosts. The first confirmed frontal kill of a Panther by a Jackson took place near Arry, south of Metz. A German armored column was advancing cautiously, believing only M10 Wolverines and Shermans were ahead of them. A Panther led the column, its commander peering through binoculars into the murky valley. He saw nothing. He signaled for the advance to continue. Across the valley, an American gunner in a Jackson adjusted his scope. He saw a dark shape moving through the fog, the unmistakable outline of a Panther hull. Even at a distance of more than 1,000 meters, the silhouette was clear enough. He steadied his breathing. The commander whispered the range. The loader slid a high-velocity round into the breach. The Jackson fired. The fog lit up with a sharp orange flash. A second later, the Panther shook violently as the round punched straight through its frontal armor. Fire burst from the driver's hatch. The tank rolled to a stop, black smoke rising like a pillar in the gray morning. The German crews behind it panicked, not because a tank had died, but because it had died from the front. That was the moment fear changed sides. Until that shot, German tankers believed their armor made them invincible. They had mocked American tank guns. They had laughed at the idea of American firepower. They had become so used to seeing rounds bounce off their frontal plates that they hardly flinched when hit. But now suddenly the certainty was gone. The one advantage German armor always possessed, their legendary frontal protection, was shattered by a single thunderous shot from an M36. As the battle in Lorraine continued, this pattern repeated again and again. A Tiger advancing along the canal at Meisières took a 90mm hit directly through the glacis plate and erupted into flame. Another Tiger near Gravelotte was destroyed from over 900 meters by a Jackson firing from behind a stone farmhouse. Panther crews, who normally advanced boldly, began creeping forward at a crawl, turning their hulls nervously, trying to avoid exposing their fronts to unknown American positions. One German lieutenant wrote in his diary after losing 2 Panthers in a single afternoon, "We no longer know where the danger comes from. The Americans kill us from the front now." This psychological shift was devastating. German aggressiveness, once their greatest strength, began to erode. Panthers hesitated at crossroads. Tigers waited for infantry that never arrived. The fog that once protected them now felt hostile, filled with unseen American guns. Meanwhile, the Jackson crews grew more confident with each battle. They finally had the tool they had begged for since Tunisia. They no longer had to risk dangerous flanking maneuvers. They no longer had to sacrifice their vehicles to buy time for infantry. They could fight on equal footing with the most feared tanks of the war. American battalion logs from Lorraine described the sudden transformation vividly. The mood of our tank destroyer companies is completely different now. Where fear once sat, confidence now stood. The Jackson did not solve every problem. Its armor was still thin. Its open turret was still a liability, and it still needed careful positioning to survive. But in the hands of a skilled crew, the Jackson became something the Germans had never expected to face on the Western Front. A tank destroyer that could kill them in the role they believed only they could dominate. In one especially telling engagement outside Dornat, a German Panther platoon attempted to force a river crossing. They believed the Americans would retreat. Instead, 3 Jacksons fired in rapid succession, each gunner selecting a different target. Within 30 seconds, 3 Panthers were burning on the far bank. Not one had been hit from the flank. All 3 had been killed from the front. Word of these incidents spread rapidly through the German armored formations. Rumor circulated that the Americans had copied the famous German 88. Some believed the Americans were secretly fielding a new heavy tank. Some crews refused to advance until infantry scouted ahead for what they called the American front breaker. But the truth was simpler and far more frightening for the German tank corps. The Americans had finally built a gun that ruined the balance of power. The Americans had finally built a weapon that erased the myth of German invulnerability. The Americans had finally built the M36 Jackson. And at Lorraine, that weapon made every German tank crew understand a new reality. The battlefield no longer belonged to the heaviest tank. It belonged to the gun that could kill first.
The Ardennes was the last place anyone expected a turning point in American tank-destroying power. It was December 1944, the coldest winter Europe had seen in years. Snow lay thick across the forests. Frost clung to branches like crystal claws. The sky was a dull, heavy gray that promised more ice, more misery, more silence broken only by distant artillery. It was under these brutal conditions that the Germans launched their final gamble, the Battle of the Bulge, and the weapon that would help stop that offensive was not a Sherman or a Pershing or an M10. It was the M36 Jackson, a tank destroyer that arrived just in time to shatter the last surge of German armored strength.
The Germans came roaring out of the forests with confidence. Panzer brigades and SS armored divisions rolled forward through the snow, their tanks forming the spearheads of a desperate attempt to break the Allied line. Panthers used the thick forests to conceal their advance. Tigers, slow but unstoppable in the minds of their crews, moved like iron beasts through narrow roads. For the first days of the offensive, American units were overwhelmed. Shermans were outgunned and outmatched. Infantry were forced back by armor they couldn't stop. German confidence soared. And then, suddenly, the battlefield began to change. American units, retreating and repositioning, brought forward something the Germans had not fully encountered: the M36 Jackson and its 90mm gun. They appeared in small groups at first, scattered through snowy roads and frozen ridgelines. But wherever they appeared, German tanks began to fall, at ranges that had once been considered safe. Outside the town of St. Vit, a Panther crept forward through drifting snow. Its commander believed he was safe at 800 meters. At that distance, no American tank gun had ever scared him, but the Jackson, hidden behind a row of shattered trees, was not using a Sherman gun. The 90mm round streaked across the frozen air and slammed straight through the Panther's front plate. The German tank collapsed into flame, its surprised crew never understanding what hit them. Scenes like this repeated themselves across the Ardennes. For years, American tank crews had been forced to wait for perfect ambushes or flank shots. But now, for the first time, they could stand and fight from the front. They could aim directly at the strongest part of a Panther, squeeze the trigger, and know, absolutely know, that the round would go through. German tank commanders were stunned. Their confidence evaporated as rapidly as the ammunition inside burning tanks. Reports began pouring into German headquarters. Our Panthers are being penetrated from the front. A Tiger was destroyed before it fired a shot. The Americans possess a gun we cannot ignore. One Panther company commander near Hoffelise wrote bitterly in his logbook, "We have lost 2 tanks to a weapon we do not yet understand. They fire from impossible distances. Our front armor gives no protection." This was the new reality of the Ardennes. Snow hid the Jackson just as well as it hid the Panthers. Fog favored the long reach of the 90mm gun. Narrow roads meant German tanks could not maneuver or angle their armor. And the Jackson, lighter and faster than German heavy tanks, moved through the forests with surprising agility. In one engagement near Hotten, an entire German tank column halted when the lead Panther erupted into flames from a frontal hit by a Jackson positioned behind a fallen pine tree. The Germans attempted to reverse, but the second tank in line was also struck from the front. Panic spread as the German crews realized they were trapped on a narrow road with no way to turn. The Jackson crew fired again and again, each shot killing the belief that German armor was invincible. But perhaps the most dramatic moment came near Bastogne. A German Tiger I advanced toward American defensive positions, confident it could break through. It had done so many times before. But waiting for it was an M36 Jackson that refused to retreat. The American gunner steadied his sights, exhaled, and fired. The round smashed into the Tiger's glasses and tore through it. The Tiger's engine exploded in a ball of flame. The German advance halted, and a message spread quickly: the Americans can kill Tigers from the front. The psychological shift this created was enormous. For the first time, German tank crews did not want to lead the attack. Many hesitated. Some demanded infantry screening. Others refused to advance until they knew where the Jacksons were. The fear that once belonged to American tankers now belonged to the Germans. The Jackson's arrival did not magically stop the Bulge. The battle was massive and chaotic, but it gave American forces something they desperately needed: a weapon that could stand against the best German armor without requiring suicidal bravery, a weapon that punished German overconfidence, a weapon that turned the tide in the snow-covered forests of the Ardennes. By the end of the Ardennes offensive, one truth had become clear. The age of German armor dominating the battlefield was over.
The Panthers and Tigers had met their match, and the weapon that delivered the blow was the M36 Jackson, a tank destroyer that arrived just in time to shatter the last surge of German armored strength. In the frozen forests of the Ardennes, the last smile of German tankers disappeared, replaced by the cold realization that the Americans finally had the power to kill them head-on. By early 1945, after the brutal fighting in Lorraine and the desperate clashes in the Ardennes, one truth echoed through the American army with absolute clarity. The M36 Jackson was more than a new vehicle. It was a turning point. It was the moment American firepower finally caught up with and in many ways surpassed German armored strength. But its significance didn't end on the battlefield. The arrival of the 90mm gun forced the United States to rethink everything it believed about tanks, tactics, and the future of armored warfare. Before the M36, American doctrine had been shaped by necessity. The U.S. relied on numbers, mobility, and combined arms to compensate for weaker guns and thinner armor. Tank destroyers were expected to flank, ambush, and avoid direct confrontations. Shermans supported infantry and fought from angles, never from the front. In theory, it all worked. In reality, German Tigers and Panthers broke those rules again and again. Sherman crews were forced into frontal duels they could not win. M10 Wolverines had to take impossible risks just to level the playing field. American tankers fought bravely, but always with the knowledge that their weapons were not equal to the machines they were facing. The M36 Jackson ended that imbalance in a single stroke. For the first time in the war, American forces had something Germany respected from the moment they saw it: a long gun, a powerful gun, a weapon with reach, authority, and psychological weight. A weapon that could kill German armor without hesitation or luck. The Jackson altered the language of armored combat. It changed who controlled the battlefield. And more importantly, it rewrote how the United States would build tanks long after the war was over. When American crews realized what they finally had, their confidence surged. The fear that had lived in the back of every tanker's mind since Tunisia began to fade. Now they could hold the line instead of retreating. Now they could challenge heavy armor instead of avoiding it. Now they could fight on equal terms. Infantry squads who once scattered at the sight of a Panther now stood firm, knowing a Jackson could cover them. Commanders planning counterattacks no longer had to rely solely on artillery or air support to handle German tanks. They simply positioned their M36s and waited for the enemy to make a mistake. But the greatest impact of the M36 was not on American morale, it was on German fear. Panzer crews had been told for years that their frontal armor was impenetrable. They believed it, they lived by it, they fought with that confidence. The moment they realized an American gun could shatter that belief was the moment their advantage died. Reports from captured German tankers revealed the shock clearly. One Panther commander wrote, "We are no longer untouchable. The Americans have a gun that breaks our front armor. This changes everything." He was right. It changed everything. Because the Germans had built their armored doctrine on invincibility. When that illusion was destroyed, the entire structure collapsed. Panthers began keeping distance. Tigers advanced more cautiously. Panzer brigades that once spearheaded attacks now stalled when scouting reports hinted that M36 units were nearby. The Jackson did not win the war alone, but it shifted the momentum in the final months with undeniable force. Its influence shaped the next generation of American tanks. The Army realized that the era of lightly armed tanks was over. The success of the 90mm gun led directly to the development of the M26 Pershing, a true heavy tank capable of fighting Tigers head-on. After the war, this philosophy continued. Firepower first, survivability second, mobility always present. The lineage of the M36, through Pershing, through the Patton series, eventually led to the M60 and ultimately the M1 Abrams. American armor grew teeth because the Jackson proved the value of those teeth. The M36 itself may have looked crude. It had an open turret. Its hull was still based on the aging M10. Its armor was thin, but its effect on the battlefield was immense. The tank destroyer concept, once doubted and criticized, finally had a champion that validated the doctrine. The M36 showed that a tank destroyer could be more than a supporting tool. It could be a decisive weapon. And in those final months of the war, the Jackson became exactly that. In the shattered towns of the Ardennes, in the fog-covered hills of Lorraine, and in the last desperate German counterattacks, it stood as the weapon German tank crews feared above all others. Not because it was fast, not because it was agile, but because it possessed the one thing the Germans thought Americans would never have: a gun equal to their own. Years later, long after the smoke cleared and the wreckage of war was hauled away, a German officer interviewed by Allied historians was asked which American weapon he had impressed him most. He did not hesitate. The 90mm gun, the Jackson. When that gun appeared, we knew our heavy armor could not save us anymore. That single sentence captures the legacy of the M36 Jackson. It was not just a vehicle, it was a message that the days of German armor dominance were over, a message that American firepower had arrived at last, a message that the battlefield belongs not to the tank with the thickest armor, but to the weapon that strikes hardest, first, and true. In the end, the Jackson did not merely kill German tanks, it killed the myth that had protected them.